Do we now need to sacrifice our niche books that we love so dearly for the sake of publishing and for the sake of trends and what's popular in the market? Is that really what we've come to?
Hey Rally Besties, welcome back to the Writing with Annie podcast, where we talk about all things writing. In today's episode, I'm going to be getting into a lot of different topics today. I'm very, very excited because this sort of topic very much interests me, and I think it's just so fascinating and sad and depressing as well. And I don't know, I'm kind of a business-minded person but also a writer, so this very much is in my league, and I'm just really excited to be talking all about sort of the influence of book trends in the writing market, and whether our books are really just a product or if they are literature and, a book and art, you know what I mean? That sort of idea of commodifying art. I think it's so interesting. So we're going to get into some of these things today. Just as a preface, these ideas are mine, and I'm trying to be objective here, but I will definitely have my passion evidently leak out. Okay, so just warning. So first off, I'm going to be looking over here because I have a couple notes just kind of down, and I want to firstly talk about a sort of piece of advice that I heard somewhere where it was basically like writing a book is art when publishing it is a business. And I think that's very much true because there is that sort of business part of publishing that, the whole point of writing a book is to get people to read it. How do you get people to read it? Through marketing it properly. However, it's clear to see that the way that social media has increased, as a way of marketing, of course, it has led the sort of, I don't want to say quality of books, but more so the priorities that publishing houses are taking, dependent on whether a book will sell. And of course, it has to have trends, it has to be in the market, it has to have all of these different things. And it's got to a point where I was reading an article that was kind of how, like, especially TikTok, it comes to a point where basically you are putting these scenes, these pieces of dialogue, these tropes in a book just so that you can make a TikTok about it saying, this is the dialogue in the book, read it. It's just an attention grab. And that's literally the stylistic choice. And I say that in like quotations because it's not a stylistic choice, it's a business choice to put that trope in there. And I say this because personally, I've been writing, my whole life, and it's come to a point where I'm kind of like, okay, I got to start publishing. I got to start like getting a book ready. And I was writing Project BB, and it's kind of like a fantasy retelling, and it's so trendy nowadays in romantasy to have, of course, that idea of enemies to lovers, that trope of enemies to lovers, especially since my book follows a prince and a sort of thief, and there's that sort of dynamic. And I was like, maybe I should change that dynamic to make it enemies to lovers so then people might read it more. And I caught myself and I was like, Anna, what the heck are you doing? Are you literally making this story just so you can say it's enemies to lovers? Even though clearly my intent of the story and the characters I've already created go so against that. They are not near enemies to lovers. And that sort of thing scared me a lot because I'm thinking of publishing the book even before I've written it. You know what I mean? And I think that's dangerous for writers and for artists who think about how your art will portray itself in the media and how you can market it, get people to buy it, to read it. It becomes much more of a numbers game even before you fall in love with the story, and really publish it because you love it. You publish it because it will sell. And that was something that scared me because I'm like, Anna, what's going to happen there? And that's kind of a big jumble mess. But the reason why I have this whole idea is because my dad barely talks about my writing at all. I mean, it wasn't really about my writing in general. It was just a book that was on the table. And I think it was the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's a very popular title. And he was like, oh, like it must be like a good book. And then he kind of redacted what he said, and he's like, sorry, no, a popular book. And I was like, so being popular is not good, I guess. And he's like, no, yeah, it needs to be, I guess, popular and good. And I thought that was extremely interesting to kind of catch that whole, or like the negativity we kind of talked about just before about, you know, how can you commodify your story, make it popular, put all these tropes in when it's not part of the story, when it's like, wait a minute, that's the reality. So should we embrace that, and should we actually start to learn how to get the best of both worlds? And he gave the example, which I thought was very helpful. My dad's like, yeah, look at Matthew McConaughey, who's an actor. He's in like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, you know, all those rom-coms. And he said, yeah, at the start of his career, he had to be in these, not stupid, they were real. I love rom-coms just generally, but he had to be in those sorts of movies to then get onto more serious roles, to then, you know, start to do things that he really enjoyed as a sacrifice. He had to do things that were popular to get his name on the market, to actually have a movie deal, to then be able to pursue what he wanted, to pursue the books, for example, that you want to write. Isn't that so interesting? And that really got me thinking. I'm like, like, does it need to be a sacrifice? I think there does, but not entirely. I think it's very smart for writers to be more conscious of the fact that they will have to market their book to an agent, to a publishing house eventually, if they want it to be read. But also, yeah, still keep the stuff that you love about your story. And it kind of helped me also question whether or not there will be classics again. Because if people, you know, authors are kind of putting out these books that are very grabby, very like, ooh, has the tropes, you know, you make a TikTok that's kind of like, if you're looking for a book with this trope, this trope, this trope, you'll get it in this. It's kind of like, yeah, that seems dumb, right? Like, that's what stories have come to, just like compartmentize. No, I know what the word is, I forgot. Putting books into these boxes, which I don't think a book should be put in these boxes. But anyways, whether or not there'll be classics again, whether or not there'll be Emma or Little Women or Animal Farm, I think that's a classic. And like whether or not that we'll get that same thing, or whether or not there'll be just these fast fashion stories, because it's just so like bizarre, this sort of debate on TikTok and social media about people judging people for what they read, and like people who read literature or kind of more classical books are seen as better readers or better people, which, I mean, I'm not going to comment too much on that. I think there is a place for entertaining. I think it is one of the backbones of literature and art, because maybe I am going to comment on it, because I think that you do have a responsibility actually as a writer to write for your audience. The same way like an actor has the obligation to act in the script that they've been written for. You know, you need to portray your story in a way that's understandable but also entertaining. And I actually, oh wow, this is all coming together in my mind. Sorry, this is really confusing for you to follow. But there was this really, really interesting reel I came across. I think some writer reposted it. I'm like, oh my gosh, really interesting. It was talking about script writing, actually.
Sir, what if a writer is attempting to create a story where nothing much happens, where people don't change, they don't have any epiphanies, they struggle and are frustrated and nothing is resolved? More a reflection of the real world.
The real world?
Yes, sir.
The real fucking world. First of all, you write a screenplay without conflict or crisis, you'll bore your audience to tears. Secondly, nothing happens in the world. People are murdered every day. There's genocide, war, corruption. Every fucking day, somewhere in the world, somebody sacrifices his life to save somebody else. Every fucking day, someone somewhere takes a conscious decision to destroy someone else. People find love, people lose it. For Christ's sake, a child watches a mother beaten to death on the steps of a church. Someone goes hungry. Somebody else betrays his best friend for a woman. If you can't find that stuff in life, then you, my friend, don't know crap about life.
And I'm like, well, I understand that in both respects. First, because yes, I understand that people do die, and like that's why stories are told. When you start a story, when you actually start a novel, like you're probably writing a novel right now, you don't start when your character is in his happy days or in their, school days. You start where it's interesting, and that's what the story is about. But I think there is such commentary, I think there's a time and place again, but there's such commentary about that idea of writing something that's entertaining, but it says something. Like there's a purpose to why it isn't the biggest blockbuster movie. But there is such like importance in creating media that is entertaining just because it's the reality. And I find that, although this is quite irrelevant to what I was talking about formerly, I think it's so lovely. That's why I adore stories that have barely any resolution, because I think that is such a reflection of art. And what is art if it's not the reflection of mundaneness and of, I guess it depends, but I'm always definitely reminded of Kafka's work and how a lot of his writings are extremely, like, almost underdeveloped, I would say, but that's a huge compliment. I adore his work and how the characters in his stories reflect his own frustration with the world, and that could just be because that's his genre and that's his vibe. But I think it can be so much more of that and that's why I think literature is so important, because that historic, those stories that we have to study in class and English class and stuff like that, it's different. It's different because it doesn't entertain, but it tells something, if that makes sense. And that's not saying that entertaining things don't say something. I think, again, it's a mix of both. It's a mix of telling a story in a way, using all the tools in your toolkit as a writer to tell a story in a way that's really evocative and very interesting and compelling, but also to tell a story through those skills. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason to why we don't just have dot points for stories. It's interesting, yes, but the way that we tell it should be entertaining. So I think that's the difference. Or maybe no difference. I think there needs to be a mixture of both. Okay, so what does this mean? What am I trying to say? To sum it all up, I think it's really makes sense for me to reflect on my own writing and what I think about, how this affects my writing. Of course, I gave that example about me with Project BB and how I've decided to be conscious of the market, but also make sure that I myself am not cheating myself by jumping the gun and publishing a book in a way that's purely for money. And part of me, one of my cousins, my cousin was explaining a story to me, and to me it had lots of tropes that it just seemed like a regurgitation of so many stories that I've already seen on TikTok, or at least I know it's like the bio of it, but it just seems so similar, and I feel very, very frustrated because I'm like, do I have to just regurgitate? I feel like that's easy. And I catch myself, and please don't think I'm up myself, but I literally catch myself like, I could write a book like that if I just simply grabbed these tropes, made a story, made it make sense, and marketed it same way everyone else is doing. I feel like that's really easy. And of course, that's a very huge generalization. I know actually publishing a book in general is freaking hard and just stupidly complex. But that's how I feel sometimes. And that's why I think, at least in my case, I've felt a really interesting nudge to the self-publishing or indie sort of route instead of the traditional publishing, especially for my own novels, which are very much niche, and there is no way to market it, period. Like my Ghost Side story, which is, Ghost Side, it's a kind of paranormal fiction. I feel like that would not be popular at all. I don't think it could be even marketed because there's not really many tropes that people find that catch them, really. And that's why, like, when you think about classics, you know what I mean, you don't like strip it bare of all of its goodness and just say, oh, like Pride and Prejudice, for example. You would not compartmentalize that or strip it bare of its freaking goodness to the point where you say, oh, it's just a love triangle. Well, read this, it's a love triangle trope. You don't, the story is Pride and Prejudice. Is not, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there is danger in, labeling stories that are so much more than the tropes. You know what I mean? I don't know, but I understand why it's progressed to this point where it's like, yeah, that's an easy way to get a story across. Yeah, that's an easy way to succinct it down into a very grabby, very, like, yeah, I would love that. Like, oh, I love this. I saw this in other books. Let me read it in this book. But again, that's like that regurgitation of that same trope. And of course the characters change, but to me, I feel like it's not as refreshing as it used to be. I think of like even the Hunger Games, like that's such a refreshing trope, although, you know, I mean, you don't say it's I'm gonna use romance again, you don't say that it's friends to lovers, you know what I mean? It is so much more than that. You know what I mean? And I know I'm like generalizing and being a little bit silly with this, but I think it's something to think about.
Okay, so I feel like I didn't sum that up very well, but basically the link here is how there's a huge trap in, I feel like, the literature world where basically readers are starting to read stories based on their popularity, and based on their tropes, which are very grabby, and a good way to succinct, you know, marketing a story nowadays. But people are starting to read these books and popularize these books based on their tropes instead of based on their messages. Kind of like how you think about classics versus modern day literature and the sort of readers reading for purely entertainment instead of thinking about the messages and stuff like that. And of course, it's a great way to get readers to read your work because that's the mass, reason why people read books, I guess. And it's a good way to get so many people entertained if it's grabby and it's hooky, but I think it's, kind of dangerous if you as a author or publishing house, begins to publish and like fill the market with these stories that seem like regurgitations of the same sort of things, through stripping them bare of just, their story and then just saying, oh, it's this trope, read it because it's the same exact thing and you will get what you want. And I think that's the problem where books are becoming products instead of stories, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I was trying to succinct down. I'm still very much thinking about this, and I'm still quite ignorant in my own understanding. So thanks for being patient and listening to this, to this point. I'll let you get back to my face on the screen. Thanks.
So all in all, I think it's important to be conscious of the fact that you will have to market your story and to keep in mind tropes that you find important and trendy and a way to get your book out there. Just like Matthew McConaughey, I feel like at least my story, you might need to make that sacrifice perhaps earlier on in your career as a writer to then eventually write what you want. I think of maybe Leigh Bardugo. I mean, I love her stories, but perhaps she kind of grew out of her fantasy and wrote something darker like how she wanted to with Hellbent. You know what I mean? I think that's hard, but that's just the reality of getting something punchy, getting a publishing deal, and then being able to have that freedom in the future. Let me know what you think about this whole thing below. I'm really, really curious, and yeah, I'm just chilling, just thinking. So I will probably succinct this in a blog on my website. Go check that out eventually because I will post this month. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy this episode. And yeah, love you guys. Bye.